Manchukuo, January 1940. Kishitani Richiro, chief of the police department, received a message that a man he had been relentlessly tracking had been sighted in the forests around Mengjiang County. The man Kichitani was chasing was the commander of the Northeast Anti-Japanese United Army, who had been harrying their forces on and off ever since the invasion of Manchuria in 1931. By 1936, he had amassed around 20,000 troops. They formed pockets of resistance around southern Manchuria and launched dozens of guerrilla-style attacks to both undermine Japanese rule and hamper their advance into the rest of China. In April that year, his men ambushed a Japanese troop in Tonghua County, which was reported on the front page of the Asahi newspaper a few days later.
およそ70名の人と遭遇し、すぐ追撃戦が繰り広げられた。西溝までに追いつき、当時はずっと前ここに着くべき福田中隊が誰も現場にいなかった。敵が200人になって我々が。
During the ambush, 10 soldiers in the Japanese troop were shot dead.
高徳34年頃は彼の全盛期でした。2000人も部下を抱え、新兵は絶えずに30丁の機関銃で守り、医療機関まで備えていた東柄大したものです。彼は関東、安東、図画、吉里、法天の5章30件を股にかけていたのです。
Known as the cancer of public safety in Manchukuo, he was by far the Japanese army's biggest threat. In 1939, the bounty on his head had increased to as much as 10,000 yuan. But to his men and his country, he was a hero. Today, he is remembered by millions. His name was Yang Jingyu.
他是一位真正的游击战大师。尽管杨靖宇没能够把他的游击战战术写成著作，但是后来人们都发现，他进行的游击战是当时令日军十分头疼的。他常常可以在半个月的时间里面，拖着日军的讨伐队在雪原上行军，走来走去，一枪不发。但是，一旦发现机会，转回头来便是一个漂亮的歼灭战。
However, in early months of 1940, things began to get much more complicated.
1940年1月1日、養肥400名、臨港県大与茶、東北方 15km、白白地帯に現れ日本語、及び局、警察大隊において公選一時間して配送せしむ。
To wipe out Yang Jingyu's troops, over 7,000 Japanese soldiers and policemen were rallied in 3 provinces of Manchukuo. With air support, they planned to encircle and suppress his men with what they called tick tactics. The man who was credited with its implementation was Kishitani Ryochiro, the chief of the Tonghua Provincial Police Department.
種のようにくっついてあえての安眠の暇すら与えない これで大抵のやつは参ってしまうのだ。
During this long drawn-out confrontation, the Japanese army used every trick in the book to capture him. The gloves were off, and they made it clear they would stop at nothing to put an end to his pesky rebellion.
实际上就是把当时分散居住的中国居民，那些农民，完全的集中到几个带有围墙的这样的集团部落中去进行居住，而这一下就切断了抗联与老百姓之间的联系。所谓鱼儿离不开水，当鱼离开水的时候，抗联的处境就非常危险了。
Without access to supplies and the assistance of their people, Yang Jingyu's army was completely on its own. Even more problematic was the freezing cold temperatures in the Changbai Mountains. Some soldiers would lose their fingers and toes to frostbite, while others would just lay down in the snow to rest and never get up again. The constant battles and unforgiving environment gradually wore the army down, and soon more and more men began to succumb to harsh conditions. Cheng Bin, commander of the 1st Division of the 1st Route Army, was one of Yang Jingyu's most trusted subordinates. Some even called him Yang Jingyu Jr.
1938年的6月，日伪军把程斌的妈妈给抓住，然后又威逼着程斌的哥哥上山找程斌去劝降，说这个如果程斌不投降，就把他妈妈杀了。
于是程斌带着第1师的110多名官兵向日军投降。这不仅仅是带走了一批人员，更重要的是，程斌非常熟悉杨靖宇的战术，而且他知道杨靖宇的部队密营在哪里。于是在他带领之下，200多个密营被破坏。
It was another monumental setback for Yang Jingyu, because now the men trailing him were intimately familiar with his movements.
1940年1月28日、帝、京、清が養妃を追跡捜査する中、並行でその主力200名を発見し、降参50分の水海捜査した。
On February 7, 1940, the Spring Festival's eve, Yang Jingyu's men were attacked by Cheng Bin and his turncoats. After barely managing to escape the attack, there were only 15 soldiers left. That evening, they happened upon a small logging camp in the forest. By chance, the loggers had all gone home for the festival, and the men were able to round up enough provisions for a meal and warm blankets. It was their best sleep in months. One week later, only 2 men still remained by his side. In the fields not far from their hideout, the Japanese search party discovered footprints in the snow. Soon, 600 bloodthirsty soldiers were descending on the logging camp.
腹なんかはずっと前から空っぽであったはずだが、その逃げ足の速いことったら君、両手を頭の上まで上がって振りながら大股で駆けていくありさまはまるでタチウオがかけるようでした。モーゼル1号式拳銃も銃弾ですが、車掌が恐るべき用語だったのです。あいつは200メートル以内なら頭の上のリンゴでも射抜くほどの名人です。彼のモーゼル拳銃のため戦士1名、負傷者6名を出した。逃げていく奴の左手に味方の弾が命中したが、それでも奴はひるまず逃げた。あれで巨人がかけるようであった。そしてとうとうある密林の中で味方を振りまいってしまった。
这600多人的队伍，由于10几个小时、将近20个小时的在严寒中的行军打仗，没有吃过饭，也没有喝水，天气又特别严寒，雪又那么深， 走着走着呢，就有人掉队了，倒下去了。等到天亮以后，600多人队伍只剩下50几个人。
Kichitani Ryuichiro knew his men were experienced, hardened soldiers, which made it all the more baffling. How could this man still be alive? In Zhengzhou, Henan province, the Ma family have a piece of birch bark they've held onto for dozens of years. Its origin is from Jingyu County, Jilin province.
我们家的花布皮呢，在我们家是一个传家宝。我父亲生前给我母亲是从我爷爷西征的巡逻地带过来的，这就也是我们家里对我们亲人的一种是念想吧。
Ma Jizhu's grandfather was Ma Shangde. Born in Juishan, Henan, in 1905, he grew up and joined the Communist Party at the age of 22. In 1932, when he was sent to Manchuria, he changed his name to Yang Jingyu. It was 25 years after Yang had left home, his family learned about the details of his death. Alone, cold, starving, and being stalked, he kept himself alive by eating bark, cotton fiber, and grass roots.
东北要下了那个7号寸的雪，找草根也是不好找，他们就吃树皮。花布皮呢，把外头那种老皮给它去掉，吃了那里边那个嫩的那一层。真的再没有了，就拿入那个身上的是棉絮，掏了棉絮，给把棉絮给撕了，那点棉絮沾点血，团团都咽到肚子里。
How long can a person live on bark, cotton fiber, and grass roots? It's almost impossible to fathom that someone could survive more than a few days in 3 feet of snow, minus 40-degree weather, and without a roof over their head. Three days later, Yang Jingyu's last 2 comrades were shot dead when they were out looking for food. On February 22nd, the Lantern Festival, Yang limped into Bao'an village of Mengjiang County to spend the night in a rundown basement. It should have been a day spent with family around a dinner table, yet there he lay, barely breathing on the frozen floor, cold, hungry, and dying from his wounds.
2月13日16時30分、保安村住民より申告があり、猛攻近所西南方 6km 490地点、陽性用らしき人を発見した。
The Japanese army rallied over 200 men and slowly approached the basement where Yang Jingyu lay hiding. Yang fought back his hunger and sickness, took a gun in each hand, and prepared himself for the final fight of his life.
彼は山の麓の地物を利用して死に物狂いに応戦し始めた。両手に日丁のピストルを持って乱射してくるのです。敵味方の距離は50ミトル。いくら抵抗しても同じ頃だぞ、降伏しろ。我々はもう一度奇襲を促した。しかし相手は返事を代わりに拳銃弾を開始です。交戦して約10分間、彼はどっちからの銃弾に撃たれてふっと倒れていました。助からした時が牛に人のした男がそっちに横をしてもっと部下に加減されて、その人は行政だった。みんなその周りに立っていつの間にまこまこしていた。絶対万歳だと呼び上げて泣き出した。
Yang Jingyu was just 35 when he died for his country. Even after his death, Kishitani still couldn't figure out how Yang Jingyu survived so long. In one last act of cruelty, he had Yang's head decapitated and disemboweled. That was when he discovered what Yang had been eating to keep himself alive.
かつて2000名の配下に君臨していった優勢右の最後にしてはあまりにも惨めだった。彼の死体は1660元の大金を身につけていたが、靴は破れ着物を破け、胃袋の中には一粒の飯さえ入っていなかった。
10 days later, the Japanese army held a memorial ceremony for Yang Jingyu in Mengjiang County. Hundreds of people attended it. After paying their respects according to Japanese customs, they buried the fallen hero on a hill along with a pine tablet that bore his name. This was their highest form of respect, often reserved for samurai who had died in battle. Why was Yang Jingyu so persistent, especially when the odds were so unevenly stacked against him? The answer can be inferred from a conversation he had with some local villagers the morning he died. When they pleaded with him to surrender and reminded him he would not be killed if he did, he said, "My friends, if all of us were to surrender so meekly, what do you think would happen to our country?" In June 1940, Agnes Smedley, a famous American reporter living in China, lay in her sickbed. In her personal diary, she wrote,
"As I thumbed through the soft, cheap pages of my diary notes, the personalities of 2 or 3 of the men whom I met at this time keep thrusting themselves into the foreground. First, there is the strange figure of General Zhang Zizhong, whose conscience haunted him across every battlefield of China.
"4 months prior, Agnes Smedley, American journalist for Manchester Guardian, came to Dahong Mountain, Hubei Province, and met Zhang Zizhong for the first time.
As my small party rounded the village houses, I saw a bareheaded, strongly built man at least 6 feet tall, and wearing the blue cotton uniform of a common soldier. He held a blue bound book in his hand, the pages folded back as if he had been reading.
连我爷爷喜欢看的书，三国演义》、说唐。说阅精忠传，当时很多年轻人都喜欢看这个。他们的理想就是练武强身，当英雄。他们最瞧不起的人呢，就是做坏事、没有骨气的人。
Zhang Zizhong was from Linqing County, Shandong Province. He joined Feng Yuxian's troops in 1917. Since 1931, he had been serving as the commander of the 38th Division in the 29th Army. When Smedley met Zhang Zizhong, it coincided with the launch of the Chinese Army's winter offensive. Their objective was to defeat the 11th Army, the main force of the Japanese invasion of China, and to take back 3 of the occupied towns in Wuhan. The most critical part of this offensive was the 5th War Zone, where Zhang Zizhong was stationed. At the time, Zhang Zizhong was tasked with leading more than 100,000 men in Zhongxiang, Suizhou, and Zhaoyang of Hubei in the fight against the 13th Division of the Japanese Army.
As I sat there, I thought of the officer who had kept assuring me that this General Chang was a patriot, a brave man, a student, almost as if he were defending him. It was then that I recalled that General Chang had once been called a traitor.
In July 1937, Beiping, or what is now known as Beijing, was occupied by the Japanese. At that time, the 29th Army of the Chinese garrison was ordered to withdraw south to Baoding. Before the withdrawal, Commander Song Zhiyuan appointed Zhang Zizhong to act as a mediator with the Japanese army.
你们走了，你们是英雄；我留下了，我就是汉奸，我跳进黄河洗不清啊！
Zhang Zizhong soon became the target of the public's ire and was regarded as a traitor to his country. On September 28, 1937, Ta Kung Pao wrote, "May the soldiers in the north take Wu and Doan as an example, who have maintained our country's integrity. Do not follow the unscrupulous Yin Zhugang and the self-conceited Zhang Zizhong." To Smedley, Zhang Zizhong was an extremely confusing figure. In 1933, Zhang took part in the world-famous battle fighting against the Japanese at the Great Wall. He led his troops through a valiant fight, defeating the Japanese army while maintaining his stronghold in the area. Smedley was dumbfounded. How could a former war hero become a traitor overnight?
33年和日本拼过大刀的部队撤走了，37年卢沟桥抗击日本的部队撤走了，谁留下？默选。而且我留下，当时是有很多机密是不能说，不能向百姓解释。谁留下谁就会被人误解，因为从百姓掌握的资讯来说，军队走了，你为什么还留下？难呐，选择。
One week after he took office, Zhang Zizhong announced his resignation from all his posts and fled in disguise. In Xuzhou, more than 30 students crowded onto the train and demanded that the traitor Zhang Zizhong be arrested. When he arrived in Nanjing, banners had been put up calling for his murder. In his memoirs, Li Zonggren wrote, "When Zhang arrived, he barely even dared to raise his head." In Peking opera, it was common for prisoners to go to court with their heads down. I thought this was only an episode in operas. I didn't know such customs existed among the northern soldiers. From that point on, the word death appeared more frequently in Zhang Zizhong's writing.
社会方面颇有不谅解之际，吾望诸兄振奋精神，激发勇气。事实胜于雄辩，必死而后能生。
At the end of 1937, Zhang Zizhong returned to the battlefield as the acting commander of the 59th Army. In March 1938, when the Japanese army attacked Taizhong, Zhang's army fought 5 days and nights and more than 3,000 Japanese soldiers were killed. This was crucial in buying time for the eventual victory at the Battle of Tai-ar-Zhuang. In May 1939, a Japanese troop with 100,000 soldiers invaded the Suishan and Zhaoyang areas. Zhang Zizhong ordered his front lines to defend the area, sending 2 divisions to outflank the Japanese. They killed more than 13,000 Japanese soldiers and won the battle. In December 1939, he rallied his troops and launched a surprise attack on the Japanese command post. Taking advantage of the enemy's shaken morale, he ordered a fierce offensive, forcing the Japanese to retreat 30 kilometers, thus achieving what was called the Shandong victory. Although praise was showered on Zhang Zizhong, it did little to rid him of the shadow that had been so unfairly cast over his legacy.
在一次和我祖父的交谈当中，因为他讲话是非常率直的，他就突然冒出那么一句话来：听说那个有1/10的那伪军帮着敌人打中国人，我真不理解，你是怎么想的？就问我爷爷，我爷爷可能当时就有点警觉了，他马上脸色就严肃起来，冷冷地回答说：“不知道。”
While Smedley might not have understood Zhang Zizhong's reserved silence, she came to understand it in time. In June 1940, Smedley, who was still receiving treatment in Chongqing, heard a shocking report from Zhang Kuo-xie, Zhang Zizhong's chief of staff.
On May 15th, General Chang was again ordered to take command of the Central Front armies, engaged in driving the enemy out of Zhaoyang and a number of other towns. Before obeying the command, he wrote a final letter telling his vice command General Fang Qian to assume command of the army in case any misfortune befell him.
到5月5号、5月6号。香河以东的战事已经非常吃紧，有的部队还失去联系。
到河东后，如能与38师、179师取得联络，即率2部与马师不顾一切向北进之地死拼。若与179师、38师取不上联络，即带马师之3个团，奔着我们最终之目标往北迈进。
我祖父就表态，战事那么吃紧，明天5月7号，我将东渡向河，我到河对面和日本人去打去。
无论做好做坏，一定求良心得到安慰。由现在起，以后或暂别，或永离，不得而知，专此不达。
那时候很多人劝他不要去，说你坐镇后方。打仗我们去，或者派副手等。由于种种原因，还是我祖父就去了，带着少量的人。那是7号。
On May 18th, he and his 2 regiments were surrounded near Fengjiaji by 6,000 enemy infantry and cavalry. They fought for 8 hours, suffering fearful losses, and General Chang was wounded in the left arm. The staff officers urged him to retreat while there was still time, but he refused, saying he had not yet done his duty to his country.
その間、背後から銃の音がした。第3中隊長の殿が弾を撃って、その人の頭に当たった。負傷家が銃の音に驚かしたみたいに、たぎり立って力を入れて銃剣をその人に差し込んで、もうその人はとうとう刺されなかった。山が倒れたみたいに倒れてしまった。
Zhang Zizhong had a wealth of battle experience. His courage and heroism were undeniable, Yet even the bravest men are forced to resign themselves to the inevitable. If I die in battle, I will be free of shame before my country, my nation, and my superiors. It salves my conscience. Zhang Zizhong was 49 years old when he finally fell in service of his country. The epitaph on his tombstone was inscribed by his former superior, Feng Yuxiang. He died a noble death, which leaves behind an indelible example for all the people of our nation, so those who are greedy for life and pleasure might have a chance for introspection. It was an admirable death indeed, and should shame the traitors of China, who betrayed their ancestors and descendants, and the spirit and integrity of true Chinese. It was a worthy death, one that will remind the overambitious and misled Japanese invaders that our soldiers are brave and that our generals are willing to face death with fearless honor. It was a heroic death. He did not die fighting Chinese people, but those who would attempt to take away our freedom. This is how honorable Chinese soldiers should accept their fate. He died in greatness and incomparable glory. This is Shuzi Hill, east of Matian Town, Zuo Chuan County, Shanxi Province. If not for the famous battle that took place here over 70 years ago, few would even know of its existence. On May 25, 1942, Zuo Chuan, the Deputy Chief of Staff of the 8th Route Army, sacrificed himself to cover the retreat of his men. He was the highest-ranked commander in the 8th Route Army to do so during the war against Japanese aggression. Zuo Chuan was from Liling, Hunan Province, and joined the Communist Party of China in 1925. In 1927, he went to the Frunze Military Academy in the Soviet Union to study comprehensive and systematic military theory. In 1930, after returning to China, he successfully served as the commander of the 12th Army, commander of the 15th Army, first bureau head of the Chinese Military Commission, and chief of staff of the 1st Corps. He also joined the resistance against the Japanese encirclement and suppression campaign. In October 1934, he took part in the Long March and distinguished himself by joining the command of several famous military operations. After May of 1936, Zuo Chuan served as the acting commander of the 1st Corps of the Red Army.
抗日战争全面爆发以后，左权将军受命于八路军副参谋长，主要是协助朱德、彭德怀建立抗日根据地，开展游击战争。
In 1940, the war became an unprecedented challenge. The Japanese army occupied Yichang, posing a threat to Chongqing, while cutting off the international traffic routes between China, Vietnam, and Myanmar. Meanwhile, murmurs of compromise and surrender began to occur amongst the Kuomintang. But the CPC meant to deal a heavy blow to the Japanese Army's caging policy. On August 20th, 1940, the main forces of the 8th Route Army rallied around 300,000 men and launched a massive attack on the traffic lines and strongholds the enemy occupied in the north. The 8th Route Army commenced a massive offensive against the mopping-up operation at the enemy's rear guard. Since 105 regiments took part in the battle, it is often referred to as the 100 Regiments Offensive. Right before the offensive was about to begin, Zuo Quan told his wife, Liu Chuan, to go with their daughter to Yan'an, who was less than a year old at the time. Before departure, they took the only family photo they would have together.
芷兰，带着太北小鬼长途跋涉，真是辛苦你了。今天安然到达了老家延安，我对你及太北在征途中的一切悬念，当然也就冰释了。
This was the first letter home Zuo Chuan wrote after his departure with his wife. It was November 12, 1940. But the situation at the battlefront was worsening. As writer Liu Baiyu recalls, at the 8th Route Army's command post, Zuo Chuan was the busiest of men. Except for the most important issues decided by the Commander-in-Chief, Zhu De, and the Deputy Commander-in-Chief, Peng Dehuai, all day-to-day tasks were given to Zuo. He was a rare talent, whether it was his understanding of military theory, his combat experience, or his commanding ability. The 100 Regiments offensive lasted for over 5 months and inflicted heavy losses on the Japanese army. In the first 3.5 months, the 8th Route Army mounted more than 1,800 attacks and destroyed around 3,000 enemy strongholds. It is estimated that over 20,000 Japanese soldiers and over 25,000 puppet soldiers were killed during that time. It could not have been more of a relief for Zuo Chuan, who after enduring the stress of months of command, could finally find time to write to his wife.
芷兰，延安的天气向来很冷了。记得太北小家伙很怕冷，在专闭的那几天，下雨起风，天气较冷的时候，小家伙不是手脚冰凉，就是鼻子不通，奶也不能吃了。现在怎么样？
During certain lulls in the war, Zuo Chuan would plant flowers in his courtyard because they reminded him of his wife's name, which means orchid in Chinese. He wrote in a letter to his wife, "Zhilan, my favorite orchid is thousands of miles away. No matter how many flowers I plant, it always feels like something is missing. Yet whenever I open my curtains and see them, I always think of you, my beloved orchid." The victory of the offensive was another thorn in the side of the Japanese army. Their general, Heiyo Taida, was sent home in shame and replaced by Yasuji Okamura, supposedly their top military expert on China. In November 1941, over 7,000 men of the Japanese army launched an attack on Huangya Cave, which was then under guard by the 8th Route Army. Zuo Chuan ordered his regiment to remain focused and steady. His intention was to use defense as a means of offense and to wait for the enemy to make the first move.
他布控了好多点，他这个计算的相当精确，是吧？哪点埋地雷，哪点安放这个枪手，是吧？怎么注意吸引敌人？就当时统计了一下吧，光这个地雷炸死日本人就有200多人。
In this battle, the Japanese army lost more than 2,000 men, and the ratio of enemy casualties to those of the Red Army was 6-1. The Central Military Commission concurred with Zuo Chuan's earlier assessment, saying this defensive battle should be regarded as a battle model for defending our enemy's mopping up campaign. Undeterred, in May 1942, Yasuji Okamura amassed more than 30,000 more Japanese soldiers to resume the mopping up operation on the resistance base. Just prior to the attack, Zuo Chuan wrote another letter to his wife.
芷兰，半年来没接到你的信，时刻担心着你及北北的一切。2月间，我们全处在反扫当中，敌人的残酷仍然如故。
He also wrote, I hope we can both strive to make progress in the Yan'an rectification movement and comfort ourselves with the devotion we have to our cause.
23号接到情报以后，总部立即做出反应，所有各机关向十字岭方向转移。但是这一个转移的过程中呢，庞大的部队，再加上后勤，再加上总部机关的人员，所以走起来相当难。
In the face of danger, while boosting morale, Zuo Chuan urged Peng Dehuai to speed up the move. However, Peng felt he should stay and fight with Zhuo.
这时候，彭德怀要坚决说：“我留下来组织部队。”但是左权将军就跟彭德怀发生了一点争执。彭总，你要是退出去，我们总部还会存在。左权将军就责令陶万成，然后和他的蒋万连，你们把彭德怀一定得安全退出去。
After seeing off Peng, Zuo Chuan rushed to their command post and resumed his place with the rest of the troops.
我们所在的这个地方就是十字岭。到25号上午，部队呢已经占领了十字岭了，但是还有一部分同志呢仍然在山沟里边。这时候呢，敌人的6架飞机来回轰炸，日军在后边是枪炮追赶。
As Zuo Chuan led his troops toward the last blockade, the enemy fire intensified. Suddenly, a shell exploded into the earth not far from where he stood. Disregarding his own safety, he shouted at his men to get down and take cover.
第一发炮弹的时候，他明知道敌人很可能第二发炮弹就会来嘛，这是一个常识嘛。第一发炮弹是死射，第二发炮弹是真正的接住目标的，就是这样的一个普通常识。作为一个将军，能不知道吗？所以他是非常清楚，但是他想的是战友，想的是左权的老百姓， 想的是主权的老百姓。所以在这一个时候，他没有误导，只要他地上10公分，就不可能牺牲。
At that exact moment, Zuo Chuan was struck in the head and killed. He was 37 years old.
想来，太北长得更高了，懂得事情更多了。可惜，3人分在3处。假如在一块儿的话，真痛快极了。芷兰，亲爱的，别时容易，见时难。分离21个月了，何日相见？念。
In one of her letters to her husband, Liu Zhelan wrote, "I would give 20 years of my life to have you return home safely. Even if you were severely wounded, I would spend the rest of my life taking care of you, and I would do it with pride." On the afternoon of July 7, 1942, the 8th Route Army held a ceremony in memory of General Zuo Chuan and everyone who had sacrificed their life for their country. Zhu De, Commander-in-Chief of the 8th Route Army, wrote this poem to remember his comrade in arms. These men sacrificed themselves for their country. They guarded it with their own blood. Their noble deeds are stained in the Taihung Mountains forever. Yet their spirit will always flow in the waters of the Qingqian River.